Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
So autistics have different sensory inputs. We have a different sort of filters set on our brain. The way that I usually describe it is, we think of our brain as something that brings in sensations and brings in the world and makes sense out of them. But most of what the brain is doing calorie-wise is filtering things out. There is so much going on that we don't need. So the brain needs to boil down our reality all the time into this sort of like laser focus of what's going on around us. And, non-autistic people have a very similar way that they're doing this. They're filtering in a very predictable way. And so they're filtering out sensations in their skin, in their ears, in their eyes. They're filtering all of this down and in their minds to have a somewhat cohesive version of reality across people as far as we can see. Autistics tend to have a more intense world, and that is that we are usually navigating sensory inputs that are a bit overwhelming. Whether it is, our clothes being uncomfortable and not being able to get used to that, noises that we aren't able to filter out around us, visual noise that we're not able to filter out. A good example of that is if you're having a conversation with somebody and the pattern on the carpet or, the design behind you there becomes somewhat compelling. It's not filtered out, and it becomes like your brain's not telling you that this conversation is more important than the pattern on the carpet. And then you have to sort of force yourself away from that. You have to force your brain to stop analyzing that, stop considering the pattern, and pay attention to this conversation.
Introducing a powerful new update from the Foojan app. Now with flexible subscription plans to fit your journey monthly, quarterly, or yearly. Our new AI-driven onboarding customizes your path to feeling better, faster, and enjoy a refreshed experience with stunning 3D interactive videos. Update now. Empower your inner voice with Foojan. Download today.
Welcome to the Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist, an author, and the creator of the Awareness Integration Theory. I'm thrilled to have you join us today for this one. I promise it's going to be very insightful discussion. And today I talked to Sol Smith. He is the author of the Autistics Guide to Self-Discovery and is a certified autism specialist who is autistic, dyslexic, and living with ADHD himself. He spent more than 2 decades as a college professor before shifting his professional focus to coaching other autistic and ADHD people to gain autonomy in their lives. Sol's speaking skills have earned him a following of hundreds of thousands on TikTok and led to educational seminars about neurodiversity with corporations around the world. He lives in Southern California, and he has a practice. He has a coaching practice, and he's done an amazing job. And you can find him at professorsol.com, where he offers not only counseling and one-on-one coaching, but he also offers a group coaching for people and many, many other information for people who have been diagnosed with any of the spectrum of the neurodivergent, autism, and ADHD. I learned a lot from him. I think it was a wonderful conversation. We looked at different angles and really a way for us to look into the internal process of the cognitive and emotional process of someone who is going through the condition of the autism. One of the most important factor was also to look at, it's mostly important as soon as someone knows and as soon as the parents see some differences in the way that their child is behaving, not to be afraid of appropriate assessment, because the sooner we assess, There's so much support out there right now for them and the person to be able to take an ownership of how they can learn to manage their life better and better instead of stigmatizing, many of these angles for themselves and thinking that I'm not good enough versus there's a condition, as many people have different conditions of how to learn about it and how to become your best with any condition that you have. Now, be sure to subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube channel and connect with me through my website, FoojanZeine.com. Go check out the app, Foojan app, which has the awareness integration theory through 6 phases, almost 31 areas of your life that you could go through. We've seen people say that they have better satisfaction with the areas of their life as they were working through this, as much as 71%. So that's huge. So go to Foojan.com or go to your Apple or Google Play and check out Foojan app, download it. You got a free trial and check it out. And I love to hear from you as you check out the app. All right. Well, without further ado, here is Sol Smith.
Listen up if you want to promote your personal growth and self-awareness. I found the Foojan app last month and I have been absolutely loving it. I personally have never learned guided meditation, but thanks to this app, I now have learned incredible tools for my own stress relief and emotional self-awareness. Not to mention, there are self-evaluation tools and professional coaching available to utilize however your journey to self-discovery takes you. Join Foojan today and redefine your life one step at a time.
Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory, written by Dr. Jafari, Dr. Foojan Zeine, and Dr. Manoukian, 3 experts in human development, is your step-by-step guide to raising a healthy child prepared for a culturally integrated world. You're supported in parenting infants to adolescents using the latest evidence-based scientific research on parenting. Order your copy on Amazon now.
Well, I am so excited to have Sol Smith with me. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Oh, yeah. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, you are an author of the book that is called The Autistics Guide to Self-Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a time that you came to this awareness that you were also diagnosed with this condition. Can you share a little bit about, when was that? How was that? And then what led you to want to share this with the world in the book?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were saying that, it sort of occurs to me that it's almost like there was a time where I just sort of found a name for it more than anything else. That I always knew I was a little different. I always knew that I thought differently and had a different set of strengths than the people around me, and a different set of challenges. I always thought that at some point that was going to even out, and I would feel like everybody else, or I would stop feeling like a fake, like I was, constantly trying to look like the part I was playing, and I would just feel like that. Everybody else seemed to feel that way. And that never happened, and I came to peace with that. I figured, well, that's just part of me being different. That's okay. And it wasn't until I started getting really interested in psychology that I dug a little bit into first ADHD and then autism, and started to see myself in the descriptions and felt like, oh, there's something to this. Either I feel a kinship with some of the differences just because different is different, so therefore they have something in common, or maybe there's really something to this. And I ended up researching for about 3 years before I came forward to my family to say, like, hey, I think I might be autistic. And it was kind of like, oh, no, that's probably not the case. And I was like, well, no. I need to sort of insist on this for a second. And, basically it's a difficult thing to do because you feel like, I call it the double imposter syndrome, that once you sort of identify yourself as autistic, you're worried that maybe you're faking the autism too. That, you've been faking all these other roles, and maybe maybe I'm adopting this for some sort of comfort. But then you start to feel like peels away some of these layers, and your life makes sense through this lens in a way that it hasn't before. So yeah, that's when I talked to my doctor and ended up with a diagnosis. And for the record, I don't think a diagnosis is absolutely necessary for people who are older, especially because of the issues with access. But that for me, because of the profession that I was like planning on going into, it seemed like a necessary step. And I was got a master's in psychology and just focused a lot on autism.
Beautiful.
Hmm.
In your book, you say we're not all on spectrum, and that
Uh-huh.
they're because at the beginning they had different names for the conditions. For example, if it was Asperger, they was meant that it was a higher functioning autism,
Hmm.
and they created all of this kind of a level of spectrum that you could see for the neurodivergent with someone who can be diagnosed with the same concept, but very much non-functional, sometimes non-verbal, and all of it. And
Hmm.
then you could see the spectrum of functionality that you could see. And you could see that a little bit with the ADHD or any other conditions. Um,
Right.
Even at that time, there was a very split over someone who was very high functioning, you know. I think they were assessing many people who were MIT at that time, that they were saying that they had the condition. What
Yeah.
is your experience of that? Especially as I say in your book, you say, no, we're really not all on the spectrum. There's a different way
Right.
of looking at this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we use words as a handy way of referring to things. And if you basically say that everybody's on the autism spectrum, there's no reason to have an autism spectrum. That's just basically saying, oh, okay, so that now that just means human. Um, Essentially, what we're referring to as a spectrum is if your brain has developed in this less than common way, then you're autistic, in that is a spectrum. So within the 4 or 5% of people who are autistic in the world, it presents lots of different ways. So yeah, like you said, some people may not be able to speak. Some people may come across as savants in some things, and some people are somewhere in between. And that's an important thing to note, because if someone in your family or someone close to you does say they're autistic, and you go, "Wait a minute, but you don't look like my nephew," that's because it's a spectrum, and that's where that understanding comes from. And a lot of times people have sort of mistaken this because they hear about autistic traits, they hear about autistic qualities, and they go, well, I've dealt with something like that before. That's happened to me. And yeah, it has, because autistic traits are human traits, but they're more less than common human traits, and they're experiencing them in abundance. And to a degree where it can begin to make your life more challenging. So yeah, we used to have the Asperger's designation. It was considered a different condition, but also a neurodivergent condition broadly. In 2013, they took that away and collapsed it into autism, essentially because it is the same thing, just again on that spectrum. And by separating it out, it was sort of creating this sort of two-tiered idea that almost came to a sort of like, upper class and lower class type thing. And we wanted to erase that and see the kinship there, see the relationship that, as far as we can understand, it's the same genetic condition, but it's just showing up in different ways. So autistics have different sensory inputs. We have a different sort of filters set on our brain. The way that I usually describe it is, we think of our brain as something that brings in sensations and brings in the world and makes sense out of them. But most of what the brain is doing calorie-wise is filtering things out. There is so much going on that we don't need. So the brain needs to boil down our reality all the time into this sort of like laser focus of what's going on around us. And non-autistic people have a very similar way that they're doing this. They're filtering in a very predictable way. And so they're filtering out sensations in their skin, in their ears, in their eyes. They're filtering all of this down, and in their minds, to have a somewhat cohesive version of reality across people as far as we can see. Autistics tend to have a more intense world, and that is that we are usually navigating sensory inputs that are a bit overwhelming. Whether it is, our clothes being uncomfortable and not being able to get used to that, noises that we aren't able to filter out around us, visual noise that we're not able to filter out. A good example of that is if you're having a conversation with somebody and the pattern on the carpet or the design behind you there becomes somewhat compelling. It's not filtered out, and it becomes like your brain's not telling you that this conversation is more important than the pattern on the carpet. And then you have to sort of force yourself away from that. You have to force your your brain to stop analyzing that, stop considering the pattern, and pay attention to this conversation. So when you look at it that way and you see these different filters, you can start to understand how, in some cases, it's going to make it where you're filtering out the pattern recognition of speech. And even though this sort of like nested and recursive communication is latent for most people, it may not be for some people who are just taking in way too much sensation in other ways. And then you can also see how we get this idea that autistics, staying on this idea of speech, when you get to high masking autistics, that we tend to use speech very literally. And it's because we are not really mimicking the speech usage of people around us. We've sort of learned speech in a more objective sense and stay with literal definitions of words, literal definitions of meanings as we understand them, and can be more confused when colloquial usages come out or when people are saying one thing but meaning another, and that sort of doesn't intersect with the sort of information transfer that we understand speech to be, if that makes any sense. I know I really took that a long way.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, because my experience has been where, when I've worked with clients where there was a distinct difference between whether it is, was it ADHD or it is an autism spectrum, but the difference that I was hearing in the office had to do with this literal communication, where with someone who had the ADHD, they could utilize the abstract concept. It was just a matter of attentiveness. And same thing was that part of the neurodivergent was like, 10 TV stations being open in their head at the same time. And we had to figure out which ones to shut off so they could focus and sometimes hyper focus on something. But the distinction that I experientially in my office had to do with what you just said, where because I don't work with young development, like early ages. I usually work from 10, 12 and higher. So I was getting more of this conversation of, as we're talking, the eye contact was not similar to others, which part of what I'm hearing from you is if there's too much going on, like right now there's stuff going on behind my back, and then there's me, and then my hands and all of it. That if that's just too much, it's easier not to look at me and look at one location where I can just focus on the sound that is coming versus my eyes have to constantly filter all the things that are coming across. Plus that it was very literal conversation. I remember me and my husband went to on a trip, and we were with some family members. And one of the son of my cousin, when he was very young, as I came into their home, he had created this elaborate, racing car and with physics and all of those. And I think he was like only 5. And he had created this elaborate thing just to share with me that I was special to him. But when I came in, he looked at me, he looked at this and looked at my facial expression and then left the room. And I was in an awe with this spectacular setup that he had created. And so then he left, and I went back and I said, I thank him and all of it. And then, fast forward, I think he was like 11 or 12. And my husband said to him in a restaurant, he says, don't you like anything on the menu? He said, no. He said, "Do you like hamburger?" He said, "Yes." So my husband left the restaurant, asked them if he could bring a hamburger into the restaurant for him. He went out, got the hamburger, came back and gave it to him. And my cousin's sons looked at him and he said, "I don't want a hamburger." And my husband says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I asked you if you liked it." He said, "I do like it. I don't want it." That moment, as I was sitting there, I looked at my cousin and I said, "Can you have him assessed for autism?" Because this was such a literal, just the exchange of two words, which gave me the connotation of, with my husband was like, if you say I like it and you're not ordering something, there's an assumption that if I go get you one, you want it.
Right, right. Yeah, because they'll jump to jump to the suggested meaning, and like something like that will happen in a meeting for adult autistics where somebody says, "Well, and you're on board with Paul's plan," and you go, "Oh no, no, I'm not. I'm against it. I think it's probably a really bad idea." And they say, "No, you literally said that you like it. You literally said that you're on board." And you go, "No, I said that it was a really well thought out plan, and I can see the appeal."
Yes.
That's not me voting for it. Like, and yeah, so there's and that's tends to be the way people communicate, is they suggest a meaning and let you sort of jump in there. And it can be tricky because autistics may not be completely consistent with that, but for a lot of the time we will try to be a little bit more literal. But especially when somebody says, "You literally said this," and then you go back to those words and say, "No, this is what I said." At that point, it feels like you're picking the conversation apart. It feels like you're being argumentative by pointing out, "No, that's not what I said. Literally, I said A, B, C, D, D, and never said F." It feels like you're being very critical to most non-autistics. But to an autistic person, they're just really trying to make themselves understood, and trying to make yourself understood with that kind of like laborious effort. Again, it sounds argumentative. It sounds sometimes like you're questioning the motives of other people, and that gets us in trouble. So this is part of the reason why we have such a massive unemployment rate, and it's difficult. And something else you said about like the eye contact and all of the information going on, I really over the years taught my students that if you're sharing something with me, if you're reading your writing, if you're asking a question, and I'm not looking at you, I'm looking down with my eyes closed, that's me listening as hard as I can. This is not me ignoring you, it's me listening. And it took a while to sort of, it takes a while every time I start a class for them to understand that body language, but being really open about that also makes them comfortable if they are autistic themselves, because they've never seen that modeled. And as we've sort of like have a generation of people who have that better vocabulary for understanding themselves, they always really appreciate that. So I try to, remind them, remind everybody that being ourselves in these situations is a nice model, and we show that you can, hold this role even with this kind of divergence.
Yeah.
But yeah, that hamburger story is a really good one. I'm going to hold on to that.
Yes. And they did go to an expert, and then therefore they sent him to therapy. And I think and he says it was one of the best things that they could, because he was going into high school and then college, and he learned all of these other social behaviors that he would have needed to go into high school with. And so part of what is also interesting in your book, that you say autism is a social construct of it. It's like it's a social dilemma, because what you see with a lot of agreed upon, let's say, assumptions, delusions, or things that we all kind of have together, and we have all of these nonverbal agreements in the social cues that we do, and it's very hard sometimes with someone who has that condition to read all the social cues, to have an understanding of all of this and be a participant in it. And part of the treatment or of the work that has been done, which I see as very, very effective, is how to bring these types of social cues into the person's world. And I think you could see that also with someone with an ADHD, that they're not, it might be a different reason where they're not paying attention, so they're not picking up the cues.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, definitely. What's hard is that neurotypicals that basically hardwire social cues and the way that socialization works. Um, all of us do to some extent, just by where we exist, where we grow up. But what's really interesting with autism is that we have underactive mirror neurons is something that we found, and mirror neurons are the part of you that makes you feel like you're mimicking what somebody else is experiencing or doing. A good example of this is if you see somebody get hurt on television, it might hurt. You might feel like you feel it. So there's that sort of relational feeling, and autistics are underactive on this. So we learn language through mirror neurons. We learn social connection through mirror neurons. And in a recent experiment, they found that when they show just scenes of regular socializing, a non-autistic person has a very active mirror neuron network. So they feel as if they're in a sort of simulator taking place in this socialization, taking place in this conversation, which suggests that the basic rules, the context of what's happening is sort of hardwired, like within their firmware. And the autistic person, they do have activity in their mirror neurons, but it's underactive. And instead, they have a lot of activity in their mentalizing network. So they are analyzing it. They're watching and trying to pick it apart, but cognitively. So the messages aren't immediately clear. And instead, you're trying to think through these things. And that's much more exhausting. Some reports say that autistics use 42% more energy even at rest because we are constantly watching ourselves to try and match what other people are doing, and then analyzing ourselves later. How did we do? What am I doing next? So we don't pick up on a lot of that, and even teaching somebody the social cues, you'll never really solve the problem because there is no really great fast and hard rule for most things. They've switched within context of where you are, if it's a work thing, if it's a home thing, if it's a friend thing, like all sorts of different factors go into that. But also, you're still going to be mentalizing it. Like so we learn these things and we're learning it mentally, not hardwiring that. Yeah, and you do see it in ADHD people as well, and there's a number of reasons. One is a lack of neuroplasticity. ADHD people, because of underactive dopamine responses, that their brains do not change shape to sort of conform in the same predictable ways that a neurotypical brain will. Autism does that too, but in a little different relationship. But yeah, that basically dopamine responses like tend to form the way brains work, which help people to adapt to situations, like do transitions, get through difficulties, co-regulate with each other. And both ADHD and autistics have a difficult time with that, all of those things.
One of the things that I noticed, and I just want to check that with you, is that since you were also sharing about the mentalization and a cognitive process, which people who are not on the spectrum a lot of times, or even ADD and ADHD, their feelings is attached to their thought process. So yes, there is like the emotional perspective of your body having some reaction, but they also have the feelings which are attached to the emotion, to the cognitive processing. So you'll make a meaning out of something and then you'll have a feeling. Most of my experience with people with the autistic spectrum, it's been the feelings are coming out, the reactions that are showing up as feelings, they're more about overwhelm of their body versus the reaction of this meaning that is being upon them, and then they have a feeling around it. It seems more an emotional exasperation of something is too much, and that, you know, they get angry because it's too much, or they get anxious because it's too much. That's a very different way of processing these two. Am I close?
Yeah, yes, sure. Like oftentimes, feelings can be too much for us. Like we could be overwhelmed more easily. Again, that sort of intense world thing, that things are more intense. But also, autistics, we hear that they have trouble knowing what they feel, and there's a number of reasons for that can be different. But one of them is that feelings aren't really as cut and dried as we present them. Like if you look at an emotion wheel that has all the names of feelings, those are really handy because if you can name what you're feeling, you have more control over it. But another thing that you're doing when you name what you're feeling is you're isolating one of the primary like responses that you're feeling, and that kind of lets the other things sort of like dissipate, sort of go away. And autistics, there are a bunch of feelings happening at once that they're sort of observing. And it's sort of like I call this emotional marbling, that it's like having a marble and you go, well, how much yellow is in this marble before you call it a yellow marble? How much blue is in this marble before you call it a blue marble? Because there's lots of different colors. So in a situation, you might be scared, but you might also be excited. You might also be nervous. You might also be curious. And that's sort of this mix of emotions that can be really confusing and, yeah, overwhelming. And how it then, manifests in this overwhelm can be different. And some of that is based on the environment you were raised in, or the different coping mechanisms that you've, bring to the table. I tend not to get angry, and I don't know if that's in my emotional wiring or in the way that I was brought up. It tends to be more like overwhelm or back off. Some people get really anxious, but so it's a lot harder to sort of sort through some of those things. And then the other thing that autistics do is think their feelings. That we want to sort of like when we do have a feeling that's overwhelming, we sort of move it from our limbic system into the prefrontal cortex by going, okay, I can figure this out. I can solve this problem. Don't be scared. And you turn it into this mental puzzle, trying to figure out, why am I feeling this way? What's going on here? And this can then trigger that feeling to happen in your, amygdala or limbic system again, and then go, wait, no, I'm going to solve this. And it starts this feedback loop that we call rumination. And that can be really, really damaging to autistics. And we do that at elevated rates. And everybody's done this before, where they maybe have something embarrassing or sad, and they think about it so much that it just makes it worse and worse and worse. But yeah, autistics tend to do this compulsively. And it's a really difficult process to stop and even to recognize at times.
Everyone, please get the book, The Autistic's Guide to Self-Discovery by Sol Smith. This is a flourishing as a neurodivergent adult. I have found many of the parents who I work with, which have young children, who are not necessarily developing exactly as the same age group at their, school is developing. And there is such aversion to getting diagnosed. And, one of the things that I've really forced upon or shared or begged at times is, can we have some sort of an assessment? Because when we do, then the earliest that we could bring in some, interventions and changes. And I've seen a tremendous amount of shift in neuroplasticity and behavioral skills that have come versus, like you said at one point, that the person just gets that they're different, but they make it as if there's something wrong with me or I'm bad, and then, it really affects their self-esteem versus having them to have an idea about, okay, this is how I'm different and it's okay that I'm different. And then now these are the skills that I need to understand. And, with the equipment that I got, let me figure out how to operate this equipment to be able to be successful in life with all of these other people where their equipment is a little bit different than mine, right?
Right.
What would you share with parents who are having children who might be a little bit different, and they kind of avoid an appropriate assessment.
Yeah, for one thing, there's research that says the earlier you're diagnosed with autism, the better your life satisfaction. So that's a really big one. Yeah, I got an email the other day from somebody saying, "How can I work with my son without telling him he's autistic?" And I said, I do not endorse that at all. Like it's very good to name the thing. If, like you're afraid they're going to be upset, let them be upset. They'll get used to this, and then they're going to have a better sense of control. I work with lots of adults who find out that they were diagnosed. When they were diagnosed when they were 11, they were diagnosed when they were 7, they were diagnosed when they were 3, and their parents kept this information from them. And the idea being that, they don't want a label and they're afraid it's going to ruin their life to have this label. And the problem is we are being labeled by other people all the time. Everybody labels each other. And if you don't know, you don't have a word for describing your challenges, your worldview, your nervous system, then you don't know what you're navigating. You don't know what these problems are. And this is why the late diagnosed autistic is the most unemployed group out there. We're the most overeducated and underpaid. We are the highest rate of suicide. So we're 9 times more likely to die of suicide than the general population. We're overrepresented in mental health institutions. It's a really difficult thing. And lots of people will go, "Oh, well, you're not having the real challenges of real autistics." And I don't mean to discount that at all. But yeah, in the social world that we've been thrown into without accommodations, without help, without understanding, even understanding ourselves, it's damaging and it's scary. So that's one reason why I wrote the book, is to give somebody a place to start. So yeah, parents out there, what I would share is the earlier they're diagnosed, the better, and that they ultimately, you want to learn about them and not try to necessarily mold them into what you think they should be, but try and see what it is they're telling you they are. Let them follow their interests. Let them indulge in this and be a little bit more patient than you think you should be. Everybody's always afraid, "Oh, they're falling behind, they're falling behind." Yeah, nobody's falling behind. Everybody learns at different rates. Everybody is like children learn. They're made to learn. They're like plant roots drinking up water. They're always going to learn. Just because we made a system with school doesn't mean that's the way it should be. And you can be doing kind of poorly in school while still learning vastly about other things. And the one example I'll share is a daughter of mine who got really we were homeschooling in middle school, and she got really into Rubik's Cube. So into it that she was spending hours a day practicing, trying to get faster and faster, because she wanted to meet this guy who was in a documentary who was the world champion. A few months later, she was going up against him. She took this really seriously. And it became this sort of central pillar that she, for her academically, she decided that she wanted to go to in-person high school because it was going to be easier for her to get into the college she wanted to do, which had a great Rubik's Cube club, which had competitions every month. And so she did that, and now she has a 4.9 grade point average. And we're going to World Championship next week. She can solve a Rubik's Cube in 6 seconds. And the amount of hard work she put into it has translated into her understanding how to put hard work into other things. And if we had stopped her and said, no, Rubik's Cube's not important, your math and your history are important, it would have given her the idea that what you like isn't important. What you think, what you feel isn't important. That all this other stuff is. And we are giving kids that message all the time. And autistics have a harder time adjusting to that. So by letting them indulge in those, you might find a way forward that's much better than following some kind of step-by-step idea that things are always going to be, a stepping stone, a ladder to some kind of success. There are roundabout ways.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, what would you say to someone who experiences it internally? Feels different. What you said, I had impostor syndrome. I'm different, and I'm constantly waiting for the difference to be over. What would you say for them to look at the way that they are different?
Yeah, I'd say to read what autistics are writing, listen to what autistics are saying. Social media has become a really big proving ground for this, and it gets made fun of, like, oh, you're following a TikToker who's saying this. But on top of like there being some iffy information, we are also hearing a lot about the experience of autism through autistics, and the experience of feeling seen, of feeling understood. Is so rare for autistics. For me, it wasn't until I made a TikTok where I explained a meltdown that I had, that all of a sudden people were saying, "Oh my gosh, I had this too. Oh my gosh, I feel so seen." That I was like, at age 42, I was like, "Oh, wow. Maybe this is a thing. Maybe I have people out there." I had no idea, because I thought that it was just really a unique to me experience. And when I put words to it and articulated it, it helped other people see it in themselves, and it opened a lot of doors for me and for them. So yeah, listen to other autistics and follow that along. Most people who self-identify, they've been studying it for months or years. Most neurotypicals will not suspect that they're autistic for very long. So have some confidence in that, and have some confidence in the community, talking to other people. I've made an online community for autistic people at neurospicycommunity.com. We have support group meetings of every kind every week. And it's been a great place for people to find each other when they have no support systems at home, through their medical professions or anything.
That's wonderful to be able to find a group of yourself, because I agree with you so much about I'm not a person that in my work that I do a lot of labeling, because I want to
Hmm.
get to know. I don't want the label to fit you into the box. I want to get to know
Hmm.
you and who you are. But I also agree that when someone knows something about their own condition, then they have the ability to become responsible in managing their condition for the rest of their life. Or they
Right.
won't be able, they won't go read about it, they won't educate themselves about it, they won't be able to, there's some conditions that need management in medical management. A lot of
Hmm.
people who I've worked with, which they have bipolar condition, they
Hmm.
go into the denial and they won't take their medicine, medication management that they need, and they will consistently have some sort of at times dangerous episodes for themselves, while finally when they say, this is who I am and I'm responsible for the rest of my life in order to manage my life and keep myself healthy, then you
Hmm.
can see that realization and ownership of who they are allows them to be able to live, like you said, a much more of a fulfilled life and a satisfied life. So I absolutely agree with you in
Hmm.
yeah, labels are not for boxing ourselves, is more about capturing information and understanding that
Yeah.
if I need to live my life better, because now this label just allowed me to educate myself better, and I'm going to try all of those things that I'm learning, and I will
Hmm.
implement it and see some of these, what I've learned, it works for me, and some of it might not work for me, but that's how I begin. But if I'm avoiding it, if I don't want to
Hmm.
be, if I'm pushing it away, then I won't have the information and I won't utilize it.
Yeah, and we tend to stigmatize, labels as they pertain to mental health. But if you think about this in terms of physical health, and here, some of my choices may seem stigmatizing, but we wouldn't say like, well, my doctor said that it's skin cancer, but I don't want to give it a label. Like giving it that label helps you. Like we understand that, like, now that you have a name for what's going on here, we know what to do. And we definitely have built up, through decades, like a lot of stigma around mental health. And again, this is not a prescriptive thing. It's not saying this is who you are. It's a description of some of your challenges. Like you said, people who are bipolar may be afraid of that label, or maybe afraid of getting, ashamed of it. Like I have lots and lots of people I know say something to the effect of like, "Oh, my parents are like the most, people who could use therapy the most, and they're the most against it." things like that, where you find that being depressed isn't something to be embarrassed about. That by doing that, you're stopping yourself from getting out of depression.
Yes.
And in the minute that oh, these are my challenges as an autistic person, your challenges are different, and then you start going, okay, this is what some people have done to live a happier life that meet their needs differently. How can I apply that to my specific needs and specific strengths? And you change your environment, you change your goals, and yeah, it changes your life.
Now, based on the latest research that you have studied and you come across, has there been a notion of what the causality is, since it is across the world, the numbers are getting higher and higher?
Yeah, it's getting higher because we're recognizing it better. It's getting higher because the diagnostics are better, and we are better understanding of it. So we're really seeing a one-time shift, we hope. We believe that of autistic people who are over 18, about 80% of them are not diagnosed, that they weren't caught, that their needs weren't severe enough to give them the attention they needed, and that instead they were able to compensate. But that compensation, you pay a price for. Most autistics, 88% I've read, it could be higher in reality, will wrestle with addiction or to either drugs, alcohol, disordered eating, because those coping mechanisms will become a way to regulate, a way to deal with your challenges that work for a while. That's the only reason people do this, is it works for a while, and then of course it works until it doesn't and things fall apart. So yeah, this is a one-time shift where we're understanding ourselves better. The causation is genetic. It's so funny because I read a report by, a high-ranking government official who said that we need to stop searching for the genes that aren't there. And it's like, that is such an unscientific way of looking at things. Anytime you're saying we need to stop searching for something that's not there, you've come to a conclusion about a search. And what we know about genetics is not enough to come to that conclusion so far. In fact, we know that it's associated with hundreds of different genes, and we're learning more about it all the time. So there is no like genetic test. You can see it in brain scans, but essentially it is genetic. It's inherited, but the way that it's expressed is also going to be by environment. It's going to be by how you're raised, by the tools you're raised with, by the accommodations you're given. All of that's going to affect it too, just like anything else, So yeah, it's very complicated and probably much more complicated than any of us are making it. But in order to sort of talk about it, it's easier to simplify and have some shorthands. So some people find it handy to make it sound scary, make it sound like a threat, so that they can sort of rally people behind them, creating an anxiety and then creating a solution for that anxiety is something advertisers do. It's something that dictators do. It's something that a lot of people have done throughout history that is something that we shouldn't be doing in the 21st century, in my mind.
Thank you. Anything we haven't said, so that you like people to know?
I think that, I think that it's important to know that aside from all of the challenges, aside from all of the scary stuff, I would not trade it for the world. That it's a very important part of who I am. I value it, and it's no disrespect to people who aren't autistic, but I can't imagine life without it. And people ask me that all the time. Would you take a pill to cure it if you could? And of course, cure here is dubious. And no, I would not. I find my world is rich and profound. And even the sad and hard things are still rich and profound to me. And I don't want that to change. So, somebody described my book as a love letter to autism, and in many ways, that's very different than the other books out there. That it can be depressing, it can be sad, and yes, I don't want to take away from that. We don't need toxic positivity, but we don't need to overlook the positive that's there to help people embrace this and bring that out.
I agree. I totally agree that I think that there's such a uniqueness to every one of us, and this openness of understanding what that uniqueness, and especially for us to get how I'm unique and how I can contribute to my world from my uniqueness and from that angle itself. I think there's a beauty
Yeah.
to that.
Thank you. That's well said.
What is the population you work with? What is the age?
I usually work with people about 17 and up. Many of them are about my age in their 40s, which is a very common time to find out that you're autistic because your working memory declines and suddenly all the plates you're keeping in the air begin to fall. You begin to realize I've been, borrowing energy from the future and then there's nothing left. But I also work with people now who are identifying younger and want to build a life from the ground up that will match their needs and their desires. And I'm so jealous of that, the things I wish that I knew. However, my journey took me here, and of course, I'm fortunate to have done that. I do know people who work with children and teens and are wonderful at it. So I usually refer out when somebody inquires about that.
Wonderful. And I think there are more people right now who are actually do work with the kids. So it's awesome to have someone who is working with more of the adult population, because I think we do have, the ABA universities and all of it. They're getting a lot more of people who have the ability to work with younger kids. The older
Right.
we were lacking. So I'm so grateful for you to write the book and, create the counseling and create the groups and all of it. Where can people find you?
Home base is professorsoul.com, and soul is just SOL, like the sun. So professorsoul.com, you can branch out from there to the book, the community, or to one-on-one coaching. I'd love to talk to as many people as possible. I like to field questions. I in some ways overexert myself to try to talk to everybody personally.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye. Are you a psychotherapist looking to enhance your practice? The Awareness Integration Therapy, developed by Dr. Foojan Zeine, is a comprehensive guide to the principle and techniques of this powerful therapeutic approach. Join the growing community who have elevated their practice and expanded their skills by embracing Awareness Integration Therapy and witnessing its life-changing impact. Order your copy on Amazon now.